Today, I'll be talking about the evolution of video games. Video games have had a huge impact on people as a whole in the past 50 years. They have brought joy and happiness to people all over the world, showing them different perspectives in life, different stories, and so much more. There have been countless different types of consoles throughout the ages with different abilities. The first game which was made on October 1958 by physicist William Heinbottom. The first game which he made was table tennis for two. The game consisted of a ball bouncing off the sides of the screen while the players control where the ball bounces. As the console was too big, its initial release happened in 1959. That's when the basic version of Pong was released. Then, by 1962, a game called Space Wars was released, made by Steve Russell. In 1966, Ralph Baer made games like Cheese, Light Run, and many more over a period of 3 years. Jeremy Benn made a game called Space Travel, a very popular game at the time, which took over the industry. In 1970, Atari, the most popular brand during its time, opened. They released many games till 1993 when they shut down. The game they first released was Computer Space. It was a better and improved version of Space Wars. Then added Pong and around 20 other games during 1970. Many new game companies opened up like Taito, Sega, Midway MFG and many more till 1977. Then came the golden age of arcades. The golden age of arcades started when Taito released the biggest game to ever exist during the time, till 1980, Space Invaders, which was solely responsible for starting the golden age. Atari released Lunar Lander and Asteroids, which were Atari's most sold games ever, even till this date. Then Namco released the first ever game with RGB colors. The next year released when another very well known game called Pac-Man, which became the biggest selling game and beat out Space Invaders for the top spot. Pac-Man was the first ever gaming mascot character. Not only that, but it opened gaming up to female audiences and introduced cutscenes and power-ups. Later that year, Data East released the Deco cassette system, which became the first standardized arcade system, on which many games were made. Donkey Kong and Mario, called Jumpman at the time, were released in 1981. After that, in 1994, Namco released the first game to feature a 16-bit CPU, making it the first 16-bit video game to ever exist. It was called Pole Position, which is still considered one of the most popular racing games of all times. Atari had financial issues due to a tech crash, and that caused them to sell. Atari's console division was bought by Carmel, and he took over, keeping the main name but changing it to Atari Corp. The next year, the first Laserdisc game and first cell animated game, as well as the first 3D vector graphics simulation game, were released. The arcade division of Atari was bought by Namco. The next 2 years did not have any breakthroughs, but some of the current games were based on the games made in those 2 years, like versus Super Mario Bros. And Tekken World Cup, which is considered to be the father of all soccer games, as well as the NES, the Nintendo Entertainment System. The NES is the first console sold after the tech crash in 1984. The 1986 Top Gunner by XD was released, which was the last commercial arcade system to use vector-based graphics. In that time period, the Sega Master System was released. It didn't have many games until another year and a half later. Technos Japan released Double Dragon, which paved the way for all beat 'em up games in 1987. In 1988, NARC by Williams is released, and is the first commercially released game to use a 32-bit processor, which at the time was a big improvement from the 16-bit. Namco released two games, Assault and Splatterhouse. Splatterhouse was the first game to get a parental advisory disclaimer. Tetris made a jump from console to arcade industry with the help of Atari coin-op games, with the help of the Game Boy. Nintendo's Game Boy first hit American market. It came preloaded with relatively unknown PC game called Tetris. During the first holiday season post-launch, Nintendo went on a sale over 100 million Game Boy units. After that, much didn't happen till 1990, when Namco released the first 8-player game called Galaxy. Another year later, the Super Nintendo Entertainment System was released, also known as the Super NES. The 16-bit machine boasted 32K colors and could also support special effects including scaling, rotating, and transparency. Super Mario World was included as a pack-in game, much to the delight of fans. The console continued to sell for another 8 years, which is considered a long lifetime compared to its earlier competitors. Another 2 years passed, and in 1993, Mortal Kombat was released, which featured blood and fatalities, and Sega released the first 3D fighting game. In the coming years, arcade had become very weak in terms of popularity, and most gaming had moved on to consoles. The first generation was quite weak, as consoles were not as prominent in the world as the arcade machines in the past 2.5 decades. But they were still developing. By 1993, we were already on the fifth generation of consoles. The first gen lasted 8 years from 1972 to 1980, and the only consoles they had were from the same company. The console was the Manvox Odyssey, Manvox Odyssey 100 and the Manvox Odyssey 200. The Manvox Odyssey was the first console and it started the whole trend. Consoles were still very expensive compared to going to an arcade, but they were there before the arcade, so they were still bought, selling over 500,000 consoles over the time of his life. The second generation of consoles were released in 1976 and lasted till 1992. It was more advanced and had more games as more well-known companies got involved. Consoles released at a time were Fairchild Channel F, Atari 2600, Mammoth Odyssey 2 aka the Philips Odyssey, in television, ColecoVision and Atari 5200. Collectively, they sold 38,250,000 plus units, but the Atari 2600 sold 30 million copies alone, and being 10 times its closest competitor in television, which is at 3 million sales. There were also some small companies making consoles, but they barely sold 50,000 or fewer units. However, the third generation had bigger breakthroughs in sales. Third gen started in 1983 and lasted 20 years till 2003, having only four big consoles being sold, but in total sold 2 times more than that of which was sold in Gen 2, selling 78,780,000 units, with Famicom NES selling close to 62 million units itself. Gen 4 started in 1987 and lasted 17 years till 2004. The consoles released were the PC Engine slash TurboGrafx, Mega Drive Genesis, Neo Geo, Super Famicom, Super NES, Sega CD, and Neo Geo CD. The PC Engine is the smallest major home console ever made, and this allowed it to be remodeled as a handheld device towards the end of the fourth generation. But it was a failure and didn't make much of a profit. A little later that year, the Game Boy was released, which took over the handheld consoles and became a huge hit in Japan, North America, and Europe, even lasting for 18 years after that. Even though some other ones were released, none of them even came close to the Game Boy sales. The Game Boy sold 118,690,000 units, being over 10 times its other competitors. Gen 5 started in 1993 and lasted till 2005 and was very important in the development of consoles. It was one of the current most well-known companies in the world released their first console, the PlayStation, not the PlayStation 1. The PlayStation is the first computer entertainment platform to ship 100 million units. After 5 years of its release, another console had been released, the PlayStation 1, which was similar but more compact than the original, and also but the name was changed to avoid confusion with the developing PlayStation 2. By early 2007, the PS1 was discontinued. The sixth gen was also crucial in the development of video game consoles. Starting in 1998, it brought with it many different and powerful consoles to the market, like the PlayStation 2, the original Xbox, GameCube, and the Game Boy Advance, as well as some more. And with a total of 221,021,000 units sold in total, it was the most amount of units sold in a decade. The 7th gen brought in some of the most iconic and most used game consoles of all time, like the PlayStation 3, the Xbox 360, the Wii, the PlayStation Portable, also known as the PSP, and the Nintendo DS. Lasting 12 years from 2005 to 2017, it sold 508,250,000 in the generation, beating the last year two times over. The 8th gen is the current generation of consoles, starting in 2012 and is still ongoing. Till 2018, the most recent sales suggest that Nintendo itself has sold a total of 109 for 950,000, while PlayStation sold 100,000 units, and Xbox One only sold 30 million. Nintendo and PlayStation sold three different consoles, while Xbox sold one console. Xbox One sale were counted as the Xbox One S and the original Xbox One. The 8th gen is still ongoing, so thus the sales may vary. The possibility of the future is dependent on technology. I believe that the future of gaming lies in virtual reality. However, VR is currently available, but it is possible that in the future a person can transmit his mind into the game. His mind controls a character within the game with all the feelings of reality. This will need consoles to evolve from where they are now to something much, much more advanced. The future of gaming industry is heavily dependent on the growth of technology. Also, with this possible evolution comes risks. People who might not be able to handle close to that reactions might get PTSD without any real danger, as well as possible cyber attacks to trap people in the virtual reality. But many dangers come with every new scientific development in the world. So this is to be expected.